What is that?
It's just so that we can go over notes again if you guys want to watch them again or whatever you need. Okay. All right, so we've already talked about compound sentences, right? So if I have a compound sentence, what do I expect to be in that sentence?
Fanboy.
Yeah, I'm going to have a fanboy. What else am I going to have?
Subject.
You're going to have a subject. What else? A verb.
Noun.
Okay. Well, let's back step just a little bit. If it's going to be, if it's a clause of any kind, what's it going to have in it? For sure, 100%, always. Not if it's a clause. What's it going to have if it's a clause? Always.
No.
Subject.
And
Verb.
a subject and a verb, right? Okay. So a clause always has a subject and a verb. Okay. Does it have to express a complete thought if it's a clause? It can, but it doesn't have to, all right? This is what we're going to start talking about today, all right? Because remember, the goal is that you are writing more sophisticated sentences, and we have to be able to identify those pieces and parts so that we can build better sentences. A dependent clause is not expressing a complete thought, okay? So if it's a clause, there are two different kinds that we're going to talk about. Subject, verb, if it expresses a complete thought, then it's what kind of a clause? If it expresses a complete thought, so it has a subject, it has a verb, and it expresses a complete thought, it is, Cody?
An independent.
Independent. It can stand on its own. Okay, so it's independent in that case. If it has a subject and a verb, and it does not express a complete thought, take a guess. What kind of clause do you think it is? If the other is independent and it expresses a complete thought, this one does not express a complete thought, so it is dependent. Thanks, Taylor. Okay, so it's dependent. All right, that's what we're really going to focus on today. Dependent clauses and how they change sentences. All right, a dependent clause is going to help you form a complex sentence. Okay, so it's going to help you form a complex sentence. I told you we started talking about compound sentences, which we've already gone over. That's when you have an independent clause plus an independent clause joined by either a comma fanboy or a semicolon. All right, so two independent clauses joined together. We're going to work in a dependent clause at this point, and it's called dependent because it depends on the independent clause to make it make sense, to make it a complete thought, okay? So again, if we have a compound sentence, you're going to have independent, comma fanboy, or a semicolon, either one's appropriate, plus an independent clause, period, okay? And just a note really quick, when you guys come up and you do your examples, you need to make sure you're doing just the basic things. Like you need to make sure you're capitalizing important words, like proper nouns. You need to make sure you're capitalizing the first letter. You need to make sure you're punctuating your sentences. There are kids at the elementary school who are really good at that. You guys are in high school. We are working on building sophisticated sentences, and then sometimes you come up to the board and you don't even capitalize the first letter in the sentence. Okay? We're way beyond that. You need to make sure you take care of those basic things. You know how to do them, but you come up and you are used to autocorrect because texting is destroying the world, and you don't do those things, and it just looks bad, okay? That's telling me, oh, I don't care enough to do that. You need to make sure that you are taking care of those basic things, okay, in your papers and on the board, all right? So we have a compound sentence, independent, so that means we're going to have what? Break it down for me, Danny. What's an independent clause?
A clause that can stand by itself.
Right. What are the pieces and parts?
You got your subject, you got your verb.
And what else does it do? Subject, verb. You're right.
Express.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, it expresses a complete thought, okay? You've got two of those, subject, verb, expresses a complete thought, okay? So when you look at a compound sentence, you see that it has two subject-verb pairs. It has to have two, okay? So today we're going to talk about complex sentences. So that's adding a dependent clause to the mix here. You're only going to have one independent clause plus a dependent clause, all right? So when we talk about complex sentences, if we were to break it down into kind of like a formula, we're going to have a subject plus a verb that expresses a complete thought, plus a subject plus a verb that does not express a complete thought. Okay? When I write NCT, I mean not complete thought. All right? And then of course you're going to punctuate and you're going to capitalize where appropriate. Okay? So you have subject verb complete thought plus subject verb not a complete thought. This part here is going to be your dependent clause. Dependent clauses do not express a complete thought. They can come at the beginning of the sentence, they can be in the middle of a sentence, they can be at the end of a sentence. It does not matter where your dependent clause comes. It can be anywhere in the sentence. The key factor is that it does not express a complete thought and that it is dependent upon the independent part of that sentence, the independent clause, to make the sentence make sense. Here is why, okay? Dependent clauses, 99% of the time, contain something called a subordinating conjunction, all right? It would be a good idea for you to Google that and to put a list of those words in your notes, because there are a lot of them. I don't expect you to memorize them, and remember, you can use your notes on Friday's test. So, subordinating conjunctions. SWABIs is an acronym that we use to help us remember some of those words, some of the most frequently used subordinating conjunctions. So, SWABIs actually stands for since, when, although, because, and if. Okay? So again, this is not all of the subordinating conjunctions, this is just some of them. Some of the most frequently used subordinating conjunctions. Alright? So when you see words like this, and they're with a subject and a verb, they're going to form a dependent clause, 99% of the time. Okay? So when you see one of these words, okay, I'm going to throw back to your childhood here. It's going to be a clue, okay? When you see a word like this is going to be your clue that whatever comes after one of these words is likely to be a dependent clause. How will I know if it's a clause? How will I know, Caleb? What else will it have? It'll have subordinating conjunction if it's dependent, plus what else? How will I know? How do you know? Help them out. What's it going to have? It'll have a subordinating conjunction and what other two things? Because a clause always has these two things. A subject and a verb, okay? So you're going to have one of those plus a subject plus a verb. And that's going to be your dependent clause. Clauses always have subjects and they always have verbs. In this case, it's a dependent clause because it's not expressing a complete thought. Because think about when you put these words at the beginning of a sentence, okay? If Mitchell has practice, it doesn't express a complete thought. It leaves me hanging. If Mitchell has practice, then what? Okay? He doesn't get to eat dinner? I don't know. It doesn't finish it out. You need to make sure that if you're writing a dependent clause, it contains one of these subordinated conjunctions and it still has a subject and a verb. It's still a clause, it just doesn't express a complete thought. Yes?
Can I copy and paste this?
Yeah. Sure, the power of the internet at your fingertips.
Alright, that's it.
Yeah, okay. Faux show, you can't, okay? Okay, do you guys have questions about this part of it? Okay, so you're using a subordinated conjunction, which again is the word that kind of sets you up to leave you hanging, okay? Because Danny likes to eat, okay? That's it, that's all I'm getting. It's not a complete thought, it's a dependent clause, it's dependent upon an independent clause for the sentence to make sense, okay? You could never just have a dependent clause be a sentence on its own. It would not work, it's dependent. Just like you're dependent upon your parents, okay? You guys are like the dependent clauses, your parents are like independent clauses. You depend on them to make sense, okay? Most of you, okay? So, no questions about this. Okay, so let's look at an example. So which one of these subordinating conjunctions should I use?
Because.
Because, okay. because Stanley is cold, he wears a hoodie. Okay? So since that's a common theme in this room. So because, when I see that word, what am I going to think? What am I going to think? I see because. I'm all like, it's a clue. What's it a clue for? We know what, Colin? What kind of clause?
Dependent.
Likely, okay, 99% of the time, dependent clause, okay? So again, you need to get used to seeing these words. Good idea to put these in Quizlet and just go through them just so that you know that those are all subordinating conjunctions. Make sure you have a list of all of them in your notes. And remember that acronym SWABI, because that's these are the most commonly used subordinating conjunctions. And that's how no red ink refers to them, as SWABIs, okay? So again, just an acronym to help you remember that. Okay, so subordinating conjunction, so we're thinking, clue that it's going to be a dependent clause. Do I have a subject? Because I have to have a subject if it's going to be a clause. Madison, what's my subject? Stanley is my subject.
And then I'll ask for a little bit.
And what is my verb?
Is.
Is, okay? So another clue, when you have a comma in a sentence like this, you could almost draw like a dotted line here, because chances are if there's a comma, that's going to be the end of your clause, okay? So because Stanley is cold, that is my dependent clause. That's my dependent clause, okay? It is relying on the second half of my sentence to make sense, to be a sentence, all right? He is my subject, wears is my verb. He wears a hoodie. Is that a complete thought? He wears a hoodie. Yes, okay, it is a complete thought, right? So this then is an independent clause. So I have one dependent clause and one independent clause, okay? So this makes a complex sentence. So if I had to label this on a test, this would be complex. Okay, so there are a few, actually there's one big exception that you might run into. I said 99% of the time, if you have a dependent clause, it will include one of those subordinating conjunctions. There are times, though, where a subordinating conjunction is implied and it's not actually in the sentence. The reason for that is typically just that it becomes awkward or wordy, and we leave it out because we know that it's there, we know what we're trying to say, and you don't actually need to write it in there, okay? For example, I didn't know Zach likes the Browns. Okay, Zach, can you give me subjects and verbs?
I'm the subject.
I, yep. Tricky verb here.
No.
Did know, right? Because you have a helping verb here. Is not ever a verb. It's not ever, okay? Not is never part of your verb, so did know is my verb. What else?
Zach.
Zach is a subject too. And Caleb, what else?
Browns. Subject.
No, Browns is not the subject. Madison?
Is likes the verb.
Likes is my verb, okay? Okay, so I'm looking at this sentence and I'm thinking something is weird, okay? Because I have two subject-verb pairs. I have I did know and Zach likes, all right? So if I have two subject-verb pairs, what am I automatically thinking? As I'm thinking about this sentence, I'm trying to identify what kind of sentence it is. I know I have a subject-verb pair and a subject-verb pair. What am I thinking? What are my options right now? What kind of sentence is this? Mitchell? If I have two subject-verb pairs, what are my options? It could either be compound, which we already talked about, which would mean that it would need to have either a semicolon or a comma fanboy, right? Or it could be complex, like we just talked about, but that means that it also needs to have a subordinating conjunction 99% of the time, right? Because this is your clue, that it's going to be a dependent clause. Does this word, or does this sentence have a subordinating conjunction?
Maybe.
Does it? I mean, look at your list. Does it have one of those words?
No, not from that list.
Is there one that's implied, that's not in the sentence itself? How about if we said, I didn't know that Zach likes the Browns? Does that still make sense?
Mhm.
Is that really what I'm saying? Is it just awkward or wordy to put the word that in there? Yeah, we leave that out a lot, okay? Just because, like I said, it's just something that we've done, our language has kind of evolved over time. We know that that's what we mean, so that subordinating conjunction, even though it's not in the sentence, is implied, okay? So you still have two clauses there technically, okay? But this is a way that you can kind of get thrown off because that is not really in the sentence, but it's still acting like a subordinating conjunction, all right? So that's an exception to the rule there, all right?
Can PEEP still turn in the parent survey for extra credit?
I suppose, yeah,
Okay, is that online,
yes.
on like your website or
No,
software?
it's that tinyurl.com/English parent,
Okay.
okay?
It's
All
a
right.
smart one to know.
Yeah, do you guys understand what I mean by the implied subordinating conjunction there? You guys do this all the time, you don't even think about it, all right? But it just becomes sort of awkward or wordy to include that all the time. I didn't know that that was an option, okay? So sometimes it just becomes kind of, you know, like I said, it's awkward or wordy to include it. Okay, do you guys have any questions about this? If you do, you need to ask because your quiz is Friday. Your notes need to be very thorough, going over all of this information. If you want other examples, we're going to put some up in a minute. But again, you can use your notes on Friday's test. So now's the perfect time to ask if you have questions, if you need clarification on anything. Mitchell?
So is that considered a complex?
It's still complex, yes. Okay, it's still complex, even though that subordinating conjunction is implied.